In today's episode, I talk about low self-esteem and comparisons and how debilitating they can be, but more importantly, what we're going to do about it.
This is how legends are made.
One of the things we talked about today was about comparison. I had a conversation today that was really about highlighting how, in this particular instance, comparison can be so deadly. It can be so negative because we use it in a way that just pushes us back. Now, there are parts of comparisons which are useful. I think it's nice to be able to judge against, say, comparing ourselves against to where we want to be, and they're useful, helping to kind of aim our target and keep on track. But there are times when comparison is actually there and actually pushes us back and knocks us, and often is linked to a degree of low self-esteem. And so the conversation was about how do we manage this and where it's coming from. It all started with someone who was being challenged by their own self-worth, and they were making a lot of harsh comparisons about who they were compared to someone else. Now, what's interesting about that in a couple of reasons, and for one moment, it's not just about the person and the comparison they're making, but it's also to do with what they're focusing on too. You know, when we feel we're making comparisons, we only look for the things that we want to compare against. We don't often see the ones we don't. So we background other things and foreground the ones we want to see, which is obviously a conversation I've had in other videos. So already to compare, we're filtering out the stuff that makes the other person human and just focusing on the stuff that we think is what we want to compare against. So the first instance is about noticing that and saying, actually, this person or people or company or whatever it is will have their faults. They won't be perfect. They may be even keeping a very polished version for you, but behind the scenes it's all panicky, and it's like swan paddling underwater furiously, but all calm on top. So once we have that, we look to the person who's kind of creating the comparison. And for them, there's obviously a feeling that they aren't as good as they should be. There is an expectation in their head they should be achieving a certain amount, and they're not. And they use the comparison as a way to kind of reinforce that negative thinking. But in so many cases, and there's quotes that I've put out as well, it's about, you're doing great. The fact you're alive, the fact if you had a good day, well, a good day is good enough sometimes, and we need to be okay with that. And we're not okay enough with it. We often criticize ourselves. We may go to Facebook or Instagram and see these perfect lives with happy couples or happy situations. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes for these people, yet we make them our kind of models to copy or to compare ourselves. But what's more important is to recognize actually inside ourselves there's a voice that we need to override and change, because it's not helping us, it's getting in the way. That voice in your head, the one that's the harshest critic, that's something I've mentioned in the past, isn't yours, it's someone else who's put it inside there. So when we make comparisons, really recognize that this comes from a place of low self-esteem or maybe low self-worth, but that is still coming from a critical voice inside ourselves that says we're not good enough. Now, how do I leave you with something to do about it and resolve it? And the first thing I can suggest is, and this maybe seems silly, is I want you to hear that voice very clearly, and then I want you to change it. I want you to make it a cartoon voice. Make it something that's funny, quirky, or even silly, or even farcical, to have that voice with that kind of character, and put them together and just kind of keep on replaying that, kind of putting this kind of cartoon voice on top of the critical voice until they blend, and see if you still have the same feeling, if that critical voice still generates that feeling inside of you. Often you might be surprised that it actually begins to change. It's not so harsh. How we play with the voice that we let inside our head really enables us to get beyond it and to quieten it down, or give it some different shape and different states, so it's not so pervasive or doesn't infect us as much. So I hope you get something from that. I get a chance to try it out, and do let me know if you do. Other than that, have a fantastic day wherever you are.
This is how legends are made.